Hi, I'm Paul Roberts, and this is Conscious Counseling 101. And this is a difficult topic, but I want to give it an approach that you're just not going to probably hear very often, especially with the loudness of the world and everybody saying, this is the way it needs to be, this is the way it needs to be, you're going to do this and I'm going to make you, and you don't have any right to do this, and I'm going to legislate your morality. I do not know what the answer to this question is, but I'm going to bring up some things for you to think about, because people just aren't thinking. They're making a reaction, choosing a side, and that's just not, I don't think, the way that we should be. However, I don't know. So the question is this: should we legislate morality, and should we require restriction overall or partially or not at all on people having abortions? Okay? You have a government, and it is ruled very much like Jesus pointed out. We're going to have to talk about Jesus, folks. Whether you believe or not, we should consider these things. He didn't know what an abortion was. He did talk about the small children. And he did say, don't keep those small children from coming to me. For the kingdom of heaven belonged to children such as these. But he didn't know what abortion was. He also said that if you would keep one of these children from receiving a glass of water, that your punishment would be better for you to have been thrown into the ocean with a large millstone tied around your neck. So what we do about this is really serious. However, it can't be known. Jesus, when asked about marriage and the role of man and woman, said, have you not read that for this reason a man will leave his mother and father, and a woman also, and become intertwined in one flesh? With the covenant of Abraham, the idea of the Jewish chosen people was that they were going to procreate. They were going to show their faith in God and do that. But even then, there were people, and Jesus also pointed this out. You don't have to just read about it in Moses' writings. You can read about it in Jesus. There were eunuchs by choice. There were eunuchs by birth. And there were eunuchs that were made eunuchs by man. If you read the Old Testament, you'll find that there were dwarfs, there were eunuchs, there were birth defects within the chosen people. Sexual differences that we have now in the DNA code. They weren't chosen because they were like the perfect race, like Hitler tried to choose, right? They were chosen because in God's eyes, written by Moses, they were righteous. And Abraham responded correctly to God and righteously to God, and God made a covenant with him. So they are about the descendants. But even those people that were different than the rest, they weren't thrust out of society. There were certain rules and writings about them that made them a little bit different than the rest. But yeah, obviously they weren't necessarily going to procreate or even in the same ways. But they were included in the chosen society. When Jesus came, because that chosen society had abominated the word, and the higher-ups gave the word in a distorted form to the people couldn't really know what God's real word and indications of it were. And so they became lost, not knowing what to do. And Jesus had to come as the Savior. And he brought with him the truth and the light of the word in a physical form. But in that, there wasn't a sexual manual. There wasn't anything that we could talk about, like how we're supposed to relate sexually, it's still assumed that even though the Jewish society, when a man came to Jesus, says, I'd like to come with you. And he goes, let me first go and bury my, you know, father and mother or whatever. And Jesus said, come with me and let the dead bury their own dead. In other words, if you weren't following and seeing the light for what it is, and you weren't wanting to find out what that was, you don't recognize. And so therefore, your end has come of your understanding and seeing the light. If you look at the first few verses of John, you'll see that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the darkness comprehended it not. Jesus said that many are on the broad road paved to destruction, leading towards destruction, and only a few are on the straight and narrow road that leads to the narrow gate. And he said that only a few will find that. How many is a few in God's eyes? Let's say we believe these things. How many is a few? We're not to say, right? But it's going to be much less than almost all, right? Probability-wise, it's much less than almost all. So the question we have to ask ourselves, in modern day society, Jesus is talking in Matthew 20. He says, you know that the Gentiles rule over, the princes of the Gentiles rule over the rest and impose their authority on them. But those that were gathered with him when he was talking, he said to them, you're not to be this way. What you should do is, if you want to be high, you must be a servant or a minister. These are the things that are valued by God on this planet for whoever would follow Jesus. But the people that are telling you what you need to do and legislative immorality are not necessarily that type of minister or servant. They're more like the people that you might find that Paul writes about when he writes to the Romans. In Romans 13, he'll say that there's no authority on this earth that is not ordained by God. And that if you don't submit, you'll be damned. Now, you could, my father mentioned to me the other day that some versions he has in other Bibles say judged. The point is, that's secure. In other words, it's trying to tell you that God's in charge, right? And he doesn't allow anything he doesn't want. God actually wants the leaders to do what they're doing. Because in our light of truth that we have, we can find what they're doing that's wrong, but not by looking to what man says, but by understanding what Jesus teaches us. This is what's so important, but very few people do this. And so what we need to do is we need to look at the leaders and know that we're subject to them. And if we defy them, we could be put in prison, killed, who knows what. It could get very bad, and it has been very bad for various civilizations throughout our history, since Jesus and before. So what my concern is, and I express this to my family, to my mother and father, to anybody that would listen really, my concern is, how do we discern what mankind is doing today and what the leaders are doing and what we should do and how we should cope and how we should respond to all that? If I were to look at the leaders today, let's just take Trump. I've done other talks on this. If you look at the Sermon on the Mount and all the things that Jesus said was blessed, and you look at the traits that he has perfectly exhibited all through time, I think without much argument on my part, you would come clearly to see that he doesn't exemplify any of the blessed qualities. In fact, in many of the ways, he's the opposite. How can this be? If he's a leader and ordained by God. I think allowed for and ordained by God means this, and I was troubled by this for a long time. I've been studying and thinking and praying and making this about what my mentality is about in life. Yeah, believe it or not, there's a person walking this planet that spends so much time thinking about that, more so than just about anything else. But it's real problems right in front of us. And I'm trying to look for real answers and real solutions as I counsel my conscience. And I offer these to other people, but I do warn you that I don't know, and I'm not sure that we're actually supposed to know. So what I'm trying to say is, if you're not considering these things, how can you even get close to a point of view that you can count on? Let's take a look at Abbott, the governor of Texas. Let's say you were voting, you were living in Texas, and he'd come up for re-election, and you're going to vote for him. Just the other day, he says he's done everything short of murdering those that come across the border, because the answer he gave was because the Biden administration would charge him with murder. So he's restricted. It's almost like he's saying if the Biden administration wouldn't hold them accountable and somebody that would give them more lenience, maybe he would murder them. Okay, so here we don't know whether a person that's raped, because every man dies with sperm that hasn't been used, and every time there's an attempt at procreation or even a procreation, much sperm dies, and every woman has eggs that probably won't get used or die during their life. And Jesus talks about how, for this reason, man and woman will come together, it is written, and they will become one flesh, and that is a blessed choice that they may make to procreate. Whether you believe that we're grafted on to the Jewish society's ways, or whether you believe we come uniquely to Jesus in the way that he sees fit to provide a pathway for us, I personally believe is irrelevant, but I can't tell you need to believe that. But why would I be wanting to raise a person that has been raping my wife if that's not what Jesus describes as a marriage? Now, he couldn't talk about abortion. These things weren't available, but it is a little one, and he could come, right? He could come, and we need to give him a glass of water. This is why I can't say, hey, no, go ahead and have abortions. I can't say that, because then you're stopping those that would have been created and they don't come, right? But I also can't say, I forbid you to have abortions, because those people that would have come would have been stopped by any means, even the death of the mother. So I can't make a decision on either way. And Jesus didn't give us what we needed to be certain of that either. Just like the sexual manual, I can't describe what's allowable between consenting partners. I can't discern that. When Jesus said that it's not what goes into the man that makes him unholy or unclean, because that goes out into the drought or the, I guess they call the sewers or whatever, however they had the plumbing then. It's what comes out of a man that makes him unclean. And out of the mouth comes from the mind and the heart. And all things of immorality are generated there. And yes, we do hear that sexual immorality is one of those things, but every other manner of things that these leaders that are trying to tell you, I'm going to legislate your morality for you, and you're not going to be allowed under my watch to have abortions, they're still full of all these wicked things that are also coming out of their mouths. As I mentioned, Trump being against everything that we hear in the Sermon on the Mount of being blessed, he's actually against all those personality traits and character traits, to the point of almost the exact opposite. I'm not calling anybody an antichrist. But if it's against what Jesus is trying to teach us to be, and he's leading the world, and people are willingly going towards him because they have this idea that he's going to control and make everything the way that it should be, rather than the way that people choose, this is something that is going to ultimately get him elected, if he is elected, and others like him in the future. And what will happen is the moralities will attempt to be legislated and will attempt to be controlled. But we know that we can't be controlled. Why do we know that we can't be controlled? Because when Jesus was talking to the Jews about procreation and about adultery, even though he didn't condemn the woman in the square, when he said, he who is without sin cast the first stone, and he got up and said, woman, where are your accusers? They've all left. They have not condemned you, and neither will I. But he does say this about adultery, that when he was questioned by the scribes and the Pharisees, why did Moses give a ability to have a divorce? He said from the beginning it was not this way. But because your hearts were made hardened by society and your choices, he allowed for it. As the society went through all kinds of, you can read about this in the Old Testament. You can find their entire thing written out. I don't think very many people dispute that that's all real. Let's not talk about the flood. Let's not talk about the Garden of Eden. But the idea that this is recorded history and that these are real people, let's talk about that. Okay? So he said to them that only because your hearts have been made hardened. But the divorce wasn't supposed to ever be a part of it. You were supposed to commit to that person. And you were supposed to be that person with them and be holy and righteous and live according to the covenant. But Jesus said that if you even have the desire for another person, you've already committed adultery for yourselves, without ever having to done it, right? So you can't legislate morality, because even if you stop somebody from having an abortion, you'd almost have to put them in shackles, because there'll always be other ways to do it. People will go underground and they'll do it, right? There are other ways to do it, okay? You can't stop somebody from wanting to do it, even if it's wrong, or if it's not known, or if it's right. You can't stop it. So at the very beginning, from your very first step on this journey, in this race, you can't succeed. And I would say to you that if Jesus stood up and said to the woman, I will not condemn you either, that even though later he said, if you keep the little ones, actually, I may be off on the timing. He could have said it earlier or later. I don't have a Bible in front of me right now, and I'm not a scholar by any way, shape, or imagination, but I do put all these things in my heart. Even though he said, don't stop anyone from coming to me, these little ones, was he talking about abortion if he didn't know what abortion was? We don't know these things, but we do know that you cannot stop what is in the heart of mankind. Even Moses issued an ability for a man to divorce. Even though Jesus said, if you divorce whoever you're with, you commit adultery with. That's what he says, because it's what's in your heart. If your heart is that you want to kill, you want to use sexual things available to you and willy-nilly not care and abort them for no reason, just as birth control or something so nonchalant like that, if there is a judgment, you'd be judged. Do you need mankind to impose their authority on you in order to make sure that happens? Or is that humanistic and we believe God's not in control? Remember, if you read Habakkuk, you'll see that there are time periods where it may appear to us that things are not in God's control. But God shows us that he's doing something on purpose for those that might come to see and be conscious of something, to make an understanding, discovery within their own consciousness and understanding of it, and not make a knee-jerk reaction and rush into evil or rush into persecution or control, like the princes of the Gentiles exercising control, but to be more like Jesus taught us to be. But the word Christian was never a word while Jesus walked on the planet. But Jesus said, don't call me good. Don't call me Father. There is only one good, our Father in heaven. He's only here to be a minister and a servant and to give the truth. So ultimately what he's doing isn't trying to raise himself up or even be a judge and jury. And if he can't do that, how can we? He also said, don't put your faith in man. And yet, where do you get some of these things? Christian. Yes, Paul, and yes, Peter. And when they met and tried to formalize the church, yes, these things were talked about. And the word Christian came up at Antioch, and that's what people are calling themselves today. But are they going farther than what Jesus taught us? Are they expounding on Jesus? Or do you find that when they go in the directions they go to somewhere that you can't possibly see how Jesus' words could have ever meant for them to go there? And yet they do. And the loudest, squeakiest wheels that need the grease are the ones saying it the most, and are the ones trying to manipulate and force people to be what they think they should for the glory of God. But they're actually dehumanizing. They're actually humanizing. They're making God more on the level of man. Man needs to help God because God can't do it on his own. And what they're doing, in my point of view, and this is why I'm sharing this video, is that they're governing over one another like the Gentiles do. The princes of the Gentiles rise to power by any means necessary, even oppression of man and sin and everything that's wrong. Like I said, Trump, what has he done right? Well, he claims he's wonderful because he's going to make what God would have happen truly happen. And many of his followers believe that. But does God want to be humanized? Does God want man to tell other men what to do? If Jesus stood right in that courtyard and he would refuse to do it, why was God then offered that power? I'm sorry, I misspoke. Why did God offer that power to someone like Trump or any other man? It doesn't make logical sense. And so the reason I'm making this video today is to show you that in the world, when we're confronted with these things, we shouldn't be taking that perspective that you see many of our leaders, like for instance, Governor Abbott. I got on him earlier, but I didn't finish what I was saying. He would be willing to bar people that already exist in life on our planet from coming to what George Bush Jr. called the light on the hill of truth and all the good things that God has. And the other people are the axis of evil. Okay? Not a good example of a way to speak, because it's like pushing away people. Like, for instance, my dad likes this preacher that I've warned him about. John MacArthur, I think his name is, and he's up in Sun Valley. And I have a video on here, actually, where he talks about how he wanted so badly for Trump to get in. And if somebody wasn't like Trump to get in, that we were going to be in worse shape. Because if Trump got in, we'd be assured more that the men of God would be in charge and that our world would be shaped by them. And if the people that weren't Trump-type people got in charge, then everything would fall apart. This is a man that doesn't understand, in my opinion, what Habakkuk is trying to say. And worse, without judging, I'm just telling you how it appears to me, he doesn't understand what Jesus was teaching and the things I'm talking about in this video. So Abbott, the governor of Texas, would stop them from coming. What if those children really are trying to come to the light of the world and find a goodness? Because they're going to hamper us and not help us and rape us and pillage us and murder us like fear tactics that Trump uses? We want to drive them down and push them away and not offer them an opportunity or a glass of water. Aren't we then taking those that are living and saying, you can't have that glass of water? Aren't we guilty of what Jesus is talking about if we do that type of thing? To me, it seems like it's a simile, of course, but to me, it seems like they are. So then why would we take their points of view and rise them up high? Well, this is why. That same man that won't help anybody that's already here amongst us, even within our own ranks that are white people or actual Americans, why do we excuse all that and say, but he's good because he stops people from aborting the unborn, even if they're a threat to the parent or not consensual? Why do we elevate him so high that he can govern us and supposedly save us and make sure that we do what God wants us to do? And he knows better than we do. And he'll condemn us and judge us right here on this planet by his laws and his ways. And many others will join in with him. And Jesus himself wouldn't have done that to the woman accused of adultery. He just told her, then neither will I condemn you. Now go and sin no more. Furthermore, I've always believed, since I started studying Jesus instead of Paul when I came into adulthood, The Jewish society has the bar mitzvahs and the bat mitzvahs, and that's when you're an adult and you can start reasoning and everything for yourself. When I was a youngster, I grew up in the formalized church, and Paul-based thinkings were very large. And when I would go to my Sunday school teachers, I'd say, well, how does this translate to practical life advice? Everything is, you're gonna sin if you touch that. And if you look at things this way, you're sinning, and you're constantly in need of redemption. You're constantly needing to come to the church and have man show you what to do, because you can't have God, who is the Holy Spirit, and God and Jesus as the Trinity, can't possibly come into you and show you these things if you were to study the Word and knock on the door. You can't do that. You're not capable of it. This is the way the formalized church I've seen working. So when I came into our formalized church, or the marriage, my wife and I, we decided we were going to follow Jesus' teachings, and come to find out what that means. Okay? What I'm sharing with you today is a large part of the journey of where I've gone with this. And when I talk to others that are evangelical Christians, they don't recognize it. It's almost like they're on the dark road, paved, leading towards destruction, and they won't recognize what's clearly written, right? And even sometimes my own parents. Written right there in the Word, in Jesus' teaching, and what it means. And that troubles me greatly, because it also means that I could be wrong and everyone else is right, and I'll be condemned and I'll be damned. But how could that be if the people that are going to do it, that are going to damn me, aren't emulating Jesus' teachings, and they're condemning me on this earth and humanizing God on this earth? And Jesus showed us we were not to do that. And Jesus is God, the Son, the Trinity, the part of the Holy Spirit, mutually intertwined. He wouldn't do it. What gives man the ability to then do it? In my personal opinion, it's some of the teachings and misinterpretations of the teachings of Paul. Now, I won't say he's an antichrist either, but he's a man. And Jesus warned us about man. Jesus even warned us about himself. He said, don't call me good teacher. I'm a servant. He washed the feet of his disciples at the Last Supper. He was there to minister and to share the light of truth, and to offer that door to be knocked on, to offer that pathway towards living water. Through his teachings and understanding of the people he spoke to and about in the Jewish society, you could come to understand what he was saying and what it meant. So much so that the person who emulated the way that I came to Jesus did, and in my opinion, if God is timeless, spaceless, fathomless, then this would still work today. The woman in the household, when Jesus was there, said, Lord, take time for me. And Jesus didn't have the time. He said, it wouldn't be right to throw my meat to the dogs. I came for the lost children of Israel. And he didn't have time for her. And she said, but Lord, and she was so insistent, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And he realized that she understood what even the people of that chosen society he was having trouble reaching couldn't understand. And he granted it to her to have it be willed to her as she will. This is how I come to Jesus. I had to do that as an adult, because even though I said I was born again and I got baptized and I went through all the things in the formalized church, it was just kind of a thing you follow along. It wasn't necessarily, and it could be, God speaking to me or showing me what I needed to learn to find out about mankind, so that I could consciously counsel later on and grow through this and let it be like a phoenix rising from the ashes, and the ashes falling off of everything I learned as a child and having to relearn it, and so that I can help others and myself and my family and live for a life purpose. Even though I can't affect these government things, maybe that's why it happened to me. Maybe that was my life purpose. And maybe just the few people that I touch or reach, and those that they touch with what I'm talking about right here, will come to mean something larger than what on a daily basis I feel like I'm accomplishing. Anybody can raise a family. Even Jesus said it. Even evil people can give good gifts to their children. I could do that with my hands tied behind my back, right? My children will never cease being raised. My children will never cease having me there, unless I'm not. But I prepared ahead of time some things like this. And hopefully they'll remember what I've taught them as I went along. But I never imposed my will on them. I only ever offered these advice, teachings, by my own emulation, my wife's emulation, and my trying to figure this out as we go, and they see us all the time. We've always been upfront with them about what we're talking about. And only when it comes up in our life do we say, here's an example of what Jesus says about this. All practical. My Sunday school teachers couldn't do that in the formalized church that mostly emphasized Paul. And I find today that a lot of churches mostly do emphasize Paul. And why do I say that is? Here's why. Because ideas never die. But society didn't have the Bible in their hands, except for the monks and a few chosen people that wrote it down, until the late 1700s, when the Gutenberg Bible existed, for about 75 copies, and the printing press came into existence, and then eventually we all had it. But before then, what was prevalent? You're going to go to hell. You're going to be judged. You're a sinner. You did this and 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 this. Every single thing that Paul says. But the tender qualities of Jesus' teaching in light doesn't resonate. It takes somebody to search and want to find and care and love and knock on the door. So much of that is missed. And the reason I'm making this video is I want you to see why it's so easy for mankind to run after all the things that Paul can show, because they can be translated in their mind as judgmental things. And that can lead to fear and hatred and oppression of mankind. And in Romans 13, allow you to rise above all those, no matter what you do to get there, so that you can say, see, I'm justified by God because I'm here, I'm ordained. No, that's not justified by God. Being ordained is allowed, according to Habakkuk. Sometimes God allows us to have bad examples in front of us. And I believe that if you look at your consciousness and you look at these things and study them, don't do it because I said so. I don't know these things that I talk about. This is faith-based, and I even could be wrong. But go ahead and look at it yourself and see if it doesn't make logical sense. And it doesn't follow Jesus' teachings exactly. And it doesn't take into account the way people that are trying to live for both God and money both, which Jesus says we can't do, rise to a high place and authoritate over us like the Gentiles do, but we are not to be that way. If we are to be high, need to be less. We need to be a minister and a servant. This makes us great. This is what we are to do with our life. And that's why the only way I know is to talk to an unknown audience, other than my mother and father and perhaps my kids and my wife and a few close friends, and share these things with them. Because if you know Paul Roberts, you really don't know Paul Roberts. You know Paul Roberts and his beliefs and the things that he's drawn to that he shares with you. And hopefully a life of consideration and conscious understanding and counseling of myself and looking at others will prove to have these things very valuable for other people as well. And if there's validity to it, then it will come. And it's not like I had to do it, but I'm only doing what I'm doing to show that I'm a witness to it, a servant. I can't actually make anything happen. I can't actually say, do this. This is what God says. I can't actually do that, and I shouldn't, because even Jesus didn't condemn. I would strongly recommend that you don't take life, either living, unborn, children, adults, outside foreigners, people that tend to be hated and oppressed, people that are called savages or whatever. You don't take any life for granted or try to slot it and push it down to various levels. You just realize that every single person should be, in my personal opinion, looking for conscious understanding of powers that can't be seen in the non-physical realm and trying with all their power and ability, without being sure of anything and saying, I know, and having certainty, which is an arch enemy to mankind. Certainty is, because then we don't have faith. The faith of a mustard seed is all you need. You can move mountains, just like the crumbs from the dog. It got the crumbs that fell from the master's table. That woman valued those things. Anything that Jesus could give was enough. Jesus knew that that was important, that she saw that and others didn't, and she willed it to her. That's all you have to do, according to Jesus' teachings. Sure, we can always keep on growing, right? But we can never become certain. We can only use that faith. And because of the not ability to see, Jesus says, blessed are those that have not seen and yet believe. Now, when you're in the places like Antioch and you're forming the first church, it's not just Paul. There's Peter and there's other people. Peter was the rock that the church, Jesus said, that he's going to build his church on. And in my personal opinion, Jesus also said, get behind me, Satan. He also was denied. Peter did those things. So why is he the rock? I think he's the rock because we need to come to see that we're not going to place a value in man. We're going to see that man is flawed. Man did not succeed in the way that Jesus did. And when we find those flaws in mankind, even in Peter, the way the church is built on that rock, that is also flawed, and by men like Peter and Paul, possibly, or me, even me, all of us. We can learn from those flaws because we know not to say we know. We know to say we believe this in faith. This is my purpose that has been shared with me at age 58 that I constantly look at on a daily basis. Once I make sure we have enough money to make sure the house works and we have food and take care of the kids' needs, whatnot, we're not left with a whole lot of anything else but this life purpose in sharing. And God doesn't need me to do this, but Jesus, I think, would like me to, and so I do. And I think that every person that would want to exert physicality of law and rule on others is legislating morality and can't do it because you can't change a man's heart. You can't change a woman's heart. You can just try to force your will on people and make it difficult to do whatever else they might choose otherwise. That's not light. That's power. That's not servitude and ministering. That's authority. This is not what Jesus is about. I'm done for today. This is Paul Roberts, and this is Conscious Counseling 101. And of course, I'd love to hear from you.